Hello, my friends. I am sorry if this is coming out super late into June. There's just a lot going on at the moment, which you will be seeing soon, I'm sure. But there's a lot going on at the moment, so I am recording this video in moderately early June, but I don't exactly know when I'm going to have time to edit it and when it's going to come out, but fingers crossed it's soon. Anyway, I didn't actually do my April reading wrap up. And that's because I actually only had like 3 books to review at the end of April, so it really didn't seem worth doing a book wrap up for 3 books. So I'm combining my April and my May wrap ups all into one, and I'm releasing it at the end of June. So let's take a look at all of the books that I read in April and May of 2024. This year, I hope, unless you're from the future. Then maybe this is 5 years ago for you. I don't know. But this is 2024 for me. And we're going to take a look at the books that I read in the past 2 months. And we are starting with most of them are here. Alright, we are starting with The Outsider by Stephen King. So this follows a police detective in a small town trying to solve the very gruesome murder of a young boy. If you're at all squeamish about the concept of a young child being raped and murdered, don't read this book. It is really bad. I feel like I need a trigger warning just for what I just said to watch out for trigger warnings of. But it's a really awful crime. As far as the book's concerned, it's a good book. I think it was a really well written book. It was a good book. I keep saying it was a good book. It was a good book. Unfortunately, I had a slightly unfortunate experience for me in which I was kind of expecting to actually be able to solve the crime, like the way that it was written. Obviously, Stephen King writes a lot of non-realistic things. The scary clown demon, is, probably his most famous work these days with the movies recently. So I should have known better than to expect this to not be similar supernatural lines. But just the way it was written in the start, he's like a detective, he's trying to solve the crime. I was like, cool, there's like this cool crime that could not possibly have happened that I get to solve. But no, it's just a demon. Um which, I mean, spoilers, I guess, but like, I don't want you guys to have the same experience as me. Don't expect to be able to solve this crime. It's not actually solvable in the real world. So I didn't actually enjoy this book. I can recognize that it was a very well written book. It was a very good book. If I'd gone into it with the correct expectations, I probably would have had a perfectly fine experience. I don't think I would have loved it just because the crime is so horrible. Something else that really put me off was just the way he treated his wife. He was very dismissive of her experiences in this book, and he's not a bad guy, like he wasn't abusing her or anything. But just, yeah, some of his lack of belief in what she had seen was really I didn't like it. Just gave me some ick. And yeah, it was fine. But I will not be continuing this series. I was supposed to read Holly for the Goodreads Award winners from 2023, but I'm just not going to do it. This is the first book in the series. Holly is the third book in the series, and I just didn't feel like reading another 2 books along this same vein. So this is The Outsider. I gave it 3 stars in the end. It was good. That's all. I mean, that's not all I have to say on it because I've said a lot about it, but that is all the rest of what I have to say about it. The Outsider by Stephen King, 3 stars. Alright, next up we have Hovercar Racer by Matthew Riley. I finished this one on the 12th of April, so we're still early into April. This book follows Jason Chaser, Hovercar Racer, who is like 15 or 16 and gets accepted into the hovercar racing school. This is obviously set in the like near future. So not like super futuristic, but they have hover cars, and the hover car racing circuit is like the big sports event of the year. There's a big pro circuit and everything, and all the kids want to be cool pro hover car racers. And Jason manages to get into the hover car racing school, which is the entirety of Tasmania. Tasmania has just been sold off to the hover car racing school. Uh, it's just a school, and it follows his exploits both at the school and into the pro racing circuit. And yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know if interesting is quite the right word. It's very fun, it's very exciting. I really enjoy this book. This is a reread for me. I've read this book many a time, and it is a 5-star read for me every time I read it. And I just love it, and I was really happy to get to reread this one this month. It's a very quick read also. Like, it's not a particularly short book, but it's a very quick, easy read. Next up, we have The Housemaid's Secret by Frida McFadden. This is obviously the follow-on to... what's it called? Is it just The Housemaid? Is the first one just called The Housemaid? Yes. This is the follow-up to The Housemaid. I read The Housemaid a few months ago, and I really enjoyed it, but I was a little bit cautious about how this was going to go, and my anticipations were realized. There isn't really much new that happens in this, honestly. Like, it just kind of feels like the first one done again. It was good, it was enjoyable, it was suspenseful, entertaining, but it just wasn't anything spectacular because it was kind of just the same thing over again. So yeah, I gave this one 3 stars in the end. It's still a good book, but it just didn't live up to what the first book was able to do. I don't know if she's writing a third one, but I think it's going to have similar issues. I just don't really know how you can do it particularly differently. Different enough that it's unexpected and new, you know? Maybe that's just me, but that's how I felt about it. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't anything spectacular. And I finished that one on the 22nd of April. So those were my 3 books that I read in April. In terms of my actual TBR for April, I think only one of those might have actually been on my TBR. Yeah, so Hovercar Racer was my book set in the future from my April TBR, but I didn't finish the rest of any of the other TBR books in April. I did, however, finish one of the books that were on my April TBR at the start of May, so we'll talk about that one in a second, but it was a book adapted for screen, which was Dune. And it is next on my list, so now we're going to talk about Dune by Frank Herbert. I have obviously seen the movies, as everybody else has, I'm sure. I assume most people have seen Dune Part 1 by now, at the very least. We saw Part 2 when it came out earlier in the year, and I decided I would finally get around to reading the book. I've never read the book. It is a very large, intimidating book, and I hadn't got around to it. It took me a long time to get through. This is why I only technically finished 3 books in April. I finished this one on the 5th of May. So between the 22nd of April and the 5th of May, I was reading this book the entire time. Which, 2 years ago, Kate would have been like, man, you read a book in 2 weeks? Great job. But now I'm just like, that took me forever. Took a very long time to read. It was a very good book, though. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't like my absolute favourite because it was a bit of a slog. It was a bit hard to get through. And it wasn't even just that it was like, oh, difficult to understand because it's so complicated. It wasn't even that. It was just like a bit boring at times, you know? Which is fine, but it just was not perfect. So I went for 4 stars for this one. And yeah, finished that in early May. Really enjoyed that one, and that was a book adapted for screen from my April TBR. Okay, next up we have... I've actually had all of these books physically so far. It's very exciting. Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Q. Sutanto. I finished this one on the 10th of May, so this was only 5 days after finishing Dune. I was very excited to just quickly read through something. This was also actually on my May TBR, and it was a book with the character name in the title. Obviously, we have Vera Wong in the title, and Vera Wong is in fact our main character. This follows Vera Wong, of course, who is an older Chinese lady who runs a little tea shop, which everyone's kind of forgot about. Nobody goes to the tea shop anymore except like this one customer, until suddenly somebody is murdered in the shop. And Vera, being the knowledgeable lady that she is, decides that she is going to try to solve this murder herself. And this follows Vera as she tries to solve the murder. A bunch of people show up at the tea shop. She starts suspecting all of them. She starts doing the classic murder thing where she brings them all together and puts them all in a room and starts telling them who the murderer is, except she doesn't actually know who the murderer is at this point. I wouldn't necessarily call this one a murder mystery. It definitely has a murder, and they're definitely trying to solve the murder, but it is definitely more like character focused. We're really just following a group of people who were brought together unexpectedly under unusual circumstances, who are all very different sorts of people from different walks of life. All of that sort of thing, and how Vera brings them together and holds them together, and the friendships and relationships that they build along the way. It was a very good book. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It's very cute, very sweet, very easy read, and it does have some little murder mystery elements in there, which are fun. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. Next up, we have the only book from this list that I do not have physically, which is Wayward by Amelia Hart. You just scroll down a little. Yes. Wayward by Amelia Hart. I finished this on the 16th of May. Get the date right. This feels so much harder to talk about a book when I don't have the book physically here. I don't know why that is. I'm just suddenly blanking on anything that had to do with Wayward. This follows 3 different timelines, all of the wayward women. And the wayward women are very unlucky in love. They all have very abusive relationships in their lives. Definitely trigger warnings for all of them. Our character, who Kate, I believe her name is set in the modern times, is running away from her abusive boyfriend. So obviously, difficult life going on there. You don't see any of the actual abuse really, because by the time you join the book, she's already on her way out, which is good. But then her ancestor, I think it would have been her aunt or her great aunt. I think it must have been her great aunt. Is the one of the other storylines that we follow, and she is actually raped and abused in that sense. So watch out for that. And then the one that we follow from like the 1600s, I think she's from, maybe even older. She's from like witch trial time. She gets put on trial as a witch, and we experience her best friend, who's kind of wanted to be more than a friend, but of course this is the olden days and lesbians not allowed. And she is being abused by her husband. There's also some miscarriages and some abortions storylines going on through that time period. Anyway, these are just all the negative things that I'm talking about here. It's actually a really good book. Sounds terrible. They all have this like affinity with the earth and animals and plants. It's not like a witch story. Like, I definitely wouldn't call this a fantasy. It's very light on the witchiness and magical elements of the world, but they do have connections with particularly the animals in the world. You going back there to scratch things, Reginald? Hello, Reg. Where are you going? Anyway, I'm doing a really bad job of explaining what this book is actually about, but we follow our 3 different generations worth of wayward women and what's going on in their lives, how they're living through all of these terrible incidents that are occurring to them or around them in their lives. and how they managed to deal with all that. So that is Wayward. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really good, but there are a lot of trigger warnings, a lot of concerning things. So please check those out before you read the book. But I really enjoyed it. And the last book that we have on the list for May is, ignore the 2 that are left because they're not finished, Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. This is the follow-up to Ninth House, which I read earlier in the year. If you watched my video back then, I absolutely loved Ninth House. These are, I've described them as dark academia, fantasy, murder mystery. There's a lot of elements going on there, but they work really well together. We follow Alex Stern, who has been brought to, I believe it's Yale. I always forget which one it is. It's one of the Ivy Leagues. I'm pretty sure it's Yale. But she's been brought to Yale to join one of the secret societies. And she joins the secret society that's here to watch and keep an eye on all of the other secret societies. Basically, all of the secret societies have magic. Some of them cut open people's bodies and see the future in their intestines. Some of them have portals. Some of them just have some really fun drugs. But Alex is part of the house that is supposed to look after the rest of them, make sure they're not killing people like they did in the 1920s and 1800s and such. But Alex is from a pretty tragic background. She's been into drugs and a lot of a bad scene in recent years, so going to Yale is not really where you would have expected someone like that to end up. So she doesn't really fit in, so it's her trying to fit into school, get through school, pass her classes, also be in this secret society, and then also there always seems to just be a murder that she has to solve, because that's another thing that her secret society does. If there's anything like any murders that are suspicious and feel like they could be associated with the other secret societies, she has to get involved and solve everything. So I really enjoy this book series. This book was also fantastic. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Ninth House, but it's still 5 stars. I still gave this book 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. So yeah, as far as my May TBR is concerned, I read one of the books, which was Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I have now also finished another book from my May TBR, but it was not actually finished in May. I finished it in early June. So technically doesn't count in this, but I'm still counting it as a tick box from my May TBR. Now I'm just going to go through and figure out some of my other reading challenge updates, and I will come back to you with those. Okay, reading challenges. First up, we have the QBD reading challenge for 2024, where I have added 2 books to the completed lists. So we have The Usual Tourist Trap, which is one of the classics, which I'm going to count June as a classic. I think it's a classic. It's probably not classic literature, but I think it's a classic. From my perspective, I'm going with it. And then the second book I'm adding is Travel Back in Time, a historical book, which I'm going to use Wayward. Not all of Wayward is historical, but 2/3 of it is historical, so I'm going to go with it. And that is all we've added for the QBD reading challenge. I also didn't add much to my Dimmicks reading challenge, so this is the Dimmicks reading challenge for April to July. So I've still got June and July to get through, so that's good. But we've added 2, so Comfort Meal, reread a past favourite that fills you with the warmth of nostalgia. I've added Hovercar Racer, and TV Dinner, a book adapted for screen or featured on screen in a scene. I have added June. And finally, I do the Adventures in Aldia, which is a a reading challenge that has been created by a YouTuber, booktuber, I guess. She has like a whole RPG that goes along with it. I'm just doing the reading challenge. So for April, it was just a break from an adventure, which I'm taking to mean I didn't have to read anything, so I've just marked that one as done. And then in May, I got extra credit in law by reading a title that had multiple L's, which was Hell Bent. as you can maybe see here, unless it's blowing around too much from my fan, / just is unreadable. I did actually complete every option for May. I read a book with multiple A's, I read a book with multiple L's, I read a book with multiple R's, and I read a book that has both A and S. This is all in the title, obviously. Inside of the actual book, they all have those things, but I managed to read all of those options, but based on the options that are below that and then below that, I went with the multiple L's as the one that I'm using for this month. So yeah, that concludes my wrap up of everything that I read in April and May and all of the reading challenges that I'm also working on. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hopefully this video is coming out soon. If not, I'm sorry that it's like the end of June and you just watched an April and May wrap up and now you're going to have a June one. Actually, it's probably not going to be a June one, let's be honest. It's probably also going to be like 3 books. So it'll probably be another June, July wrap up sort of situation. But thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. There's going to be some big things happening soon. So if you are interested in figuring out what's happening in my life, stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel. I would really love to have you here and coming along to future videos. So yeah. Thank you again if you made it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.